The gavel echoed through the marble courtroom as my father's lawyers smugly presented their case. Dad sat there with that familiar, entitled smirk, convinced he'd walk away with everything I'd built. His eyes gleamed with greed as he demanded my business, my investments, even my late mother's jewelry. But when Judge Harrison began reading my asset list aloud, that smirk vanished. The color drained from Dad's face as each item revealed secrets he thought were buried forever. Before we dive into this shocking family betrayal story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to discover how family greed led to the most satisfying courtroom justice you've ever heard, smash that like button and subscribe because this revenge story will leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't see this twist coming. 6 months earlier, I thought I was living the American dream. My name is Savannah Walsh, and at 28, I'd built a successful digital marketing agency from my studio apartment. What started as freelance work during college had grown into a company with 15 employees and 7-figure annual revenue. I was proud, independent, and foolishly trusting of the man who raised me. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday morning when my accountant Maria called with concern in her voice. She'd been reviewing our quarterly reports when she noticed some irregularities in my personal investment accounts. "Savannah, I need you to come in immediately," Maria said, her usually calm demeanor strained. "There are transactions here that don't match your authorization records." My stomach dropped. Those investment accounts contained my life savings money I'd carefully accumulated through years of reinvesting profits back into myself rather than splurging on luxuries. Every dollar represented sacrifice, late nights, and dreams deferred. When I arrived at Maria's office, she spread the bank statements across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. Her finger traced lines of withdrawals, each one substantial enough to make me dizzy. "These transfers," she explained, pointing to a series of $50,000 withdrawals. "They're all authorized with your father's power of attorney document, the one you signed when you had surgery last year." My throat constricted. I remembered that document clearly. Dad had insisted I sign it before my appendectomy, claiming it was just a precaution in case complications arose during surgery. He'd presented it as fatherly concern, wrapped in his usual charm and manipulation. "But that was supposed to be limited to medical decisions only," I whispered, reading the fine print that somehow authorized him to access my financial accounts. Maria's expression grew darker. "Savannah, this document gives him broad financial powers. And according to these records, he's been systematically draining your accounts for 8 months. 8 months. While I'd been working 16-hour days, celebrating small victories, and planning expansion, my own father had been stealing from me." The betrayal cut deeper than any business failure ever could. I spent the next week in a haze of disbelief, poring over every statement, every transaction. The pattern became sickeningly clear. Dad had been careful, taking amounts just small enough to avoid immediate notice, but large enough to fund what appeared to be a lavish lifestyle upgrade. My private investigator, Jake Morrison, presented his findings with professional detachment that couldn't mask his obvious anger. "Your father purchased a luxury condo in Miami Beach," Jake reported, sliding photos across my kitchen table. "Cash purchase, $450,000. He also bought a new BMW, paid off his gambling debts, and has been frequenting high-end casinos in Atlantic City." The photos showed Dad living like a king while I'd been eating ramen and reinvesting every penny back into my business. The Miami condo was stunning with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. The BMW sat in the parking garage gleaming and expensive. Everything purchased with my stolen money. "There's more," Jake continued grimly. "He's been telling people you're funding his retirement as a thank you for raising you alone. He's painted himself as a devoted single father finally reaping the rewards of his sacrifice." The manipulation was masterful and devastating. Dad had weaponized the narrative of his single parenthood, turning my success into evidence of his deserving nature. In his version of events, I wasn't a victim of theft, but an ungrateful daughter who owed him everything. When I finally confronted him, Dad didn't even attempt denial. He sat in his newly renovated living room, surrounded by furniture that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and looked at me with genuine confusion about why I was upset. "Savannah, honey, you're being dramatic," he said, swirling an expensive whiskey in a crystal glass. "I raised you, sacrificed everything for your success. This is just karma balancing the scales." His casual dismissal of grand larceny as karma revealed the depth of his entitlement. In Dad's mind, my achievements belonged to him by default. My bank account was simply an extension of his own, accessible whenever his gambling addiction or expensive tastes demanded funding. "You stole from me," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You violated my trust and committed fraud." Dad actually laughed as if I'd told an amusing joke. "Steal from my own daughter's sweetheart. Everything you have exists because of me. I'm just claiming what's rightfully mine." The gaslighting was immediate and vicious. According to Dad's twisted logic, I was the selfish one for wanting to keep money I'd earned. He painted himself as the victim, a father whose ungrateful child was denying him basic comfort in his golden years. "You can afford it," he continued, gesturing dismissively. "Your business is doing well. Stop being so greedy and appreciate everything I've done for you." That conversation ended with him essentially demanding I sign over even more assets to him voluntarily. When I refused, his demeanor shifted from manipulative charm to cold calculation. "You'll regret this decision, Savannah," he said, his voice carrying an implicit threat. "I know things about your business, your relationships, your mother's death that you've conveniently forgotten. Don't make me your enemy." The mention of my mother's death sent ice through my veins. Mom had died when I was 16, and Dad's handling of her estate had always seemed suspicious. She'd been a successful real estate agent with substantial savings, yet somehow there was barely enough left to cover funeral costs after Dad settled her affairs. Walking out of his house that night, I realized this wasn't just about stolen money. This was about a pattern of abuse and manipulation that had been building for years. Dad saw me as his personal ATM, and he'd grown so comfortable in that role that he genuinely believed he was entitled to unlimited access to my resources. The theft totaled nearly $600,000 money that represented years of careful planning and sacrifice. But more devastating than the financial loss was the complete destruction of my trust in the one person who was supposed to protect me unconditionally. As I drove home that night, I made a decision that would change everything. Dad wanted to play hardball and threaten me with mysterious secrets about my mother's death. He'd underestimated who he was dealing with. I wasn't the naive daughter he remembered. I was a businesswoman who'd built an empire from nothing, and I was about to show him exactly what happened to people who tried to destroy me. The next morning marked the beginning of my counteroffensive. If Dad wanted to escalate this conflict, I'd give him a war he'd never forget. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of his deception, starting with those mysterious references to my mother's death. I'd always accepted Dad's explanation that Mom died from complications following a minor surgery. The medical emergency happened so quickly, and I was too devastated at 16 to question the details. Dad handled everything from funeral arrangements to settling her estate, while I grieved and tried to process losing the only parent who'd ever truly loved me. Jake Morrison's investigation into Mom's death revealed disturbing inconsistencies that made my blood run cold. The life insurance policy Dad claimed had lapsed was actually active and substantial. Mom's real estate business had assets worth nearly $2 million that mysteriously disappeared during probate. Most shocking of all, the medical records showed no complications that should have resulted in her death. Your mother's attending physician retired immediately after her death. Jake reported during our clandestine meeting at a downtown coffee shop. Dr. Samuel Morrison, no relation to me, moved to Costa Rica within 6 months and has been unreachable ever since. The nursing staff from that night have scattered across the country. The implications hung in the air like toxic smoke. My father hadn't just stolen from me recently. He'd potentially orchestrated my mother's death and definitely stolen her estate 12 years ago. The man I'd trusted with my power of attorney was possibly a murderer who'd been living off blood money for over a decade. There's more, Jake continued, sliding a manila envelope across the table. I found evidence that your father has been using a similar pattern with elderly clients from his insurance business. He gains their trust, convinces them to grant him financial powers, then systematically drains their accounts before they die under suspicious circumstances. My hands trembled as I reviewed the documentation. Names, dates, death certificates, and financial records painted a picture of a serial killer who used charm and manipulation to prey on vulnerable people. Dad hadn't just betrayed his family. He'd turned murder into a business model. The evidence was overwhelming, but circumstantial. We needed irrefutable proof that would stand up in court and expose him publicly. That's when I remembered Dad's greatest weakness, his compulsive need to document his successes. Since childhood, I'd watched him maintain detailed journals of his accomplishments, real and imagined. He photographed expensive purchases, kept receipts for luxury items, and maintained meticulous records of his financial gains. Dad's narcissism demanded permanent documentation of his cleverness. Breaking into his house required careful planning and perfect timing. Dad maintained a predictable schedule, spending Tuesday nights at his poker game and returning home drunk and careless. Jake provided technical support while I searched for Dad's private documents. The hidden safe behind his bedroom mirror contained a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Dad's journals detailed every theft, every manipulation, every calculated move in his decades-long criminal enterprise. He'd documented my mother's murder with clinical precision, describing how he'd bribed Dr. Morrison to administer a fatal drug cocktail during routine surgery. Patricia never suspected, one journal entry read in Dad's familiar handwriting. She trusted me completely, even signed the updated will 3 days before surgery. The life insurance will fund my retirement nicely, and Savannah is too young to question anything. Perfect execution. Reading those words felt like being stabbed repeatedly. Dad had planned my mother's murder for months, viewing her death as a lucrative business transaction. He'd comforted me through grief while secretly celebrating his profitable crime. But the journals also revealed his current activities and future plans. Dad intended to frame me for embezzlement from my own company, using forged documents to claim I'd been stealing from clients. He planned to seize control of my business, liquidate everything, and disappear to Costa Rica, where Dr. Morrison had established a new identity. Once I destroy Savannah's reputation, Dad had written recently, she'll be so grateful for my help that she'll sign over everything willingly. Then I can retire properly and start fresh somewhere warm. The audacity was breathtaking. Dad genuinely believed he could destroy my life, steal my business, and manipulate me into thanking him for it. He saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited until exhausted. Armed with this evidence, I contacted Detective Sarah Chen from the Financial Crimes Division. Sarah reviewed the documentation with growing amazement and immediately launched a formal investigation into Dad's activities. This is the most comprehensive criminal enterprise I've seen in 20 years, Detective Chen admitted during our meeting at police headquarters. Your father has been operating essentially as a serial killer with a financial motive. We're talking about potential charges ranging from murder to fraud to elder abuse. The investigation moved quickly once law enforcement became involved. Dad's pattern of behavior made him predictable, and his compulsive documentation provided prosecutors with an overwhelming case. Within 2 weeks, Detective Chen had coordinated with multiple jurisdictions to build charges spanning decades of criminal activity. Meanwhile, I took steps to protect my business and assets from Dad's planned assault. I changed all passwords, revoked his power of attorney, and worked with my legal team to secure restraining orders preventing him from accessing any of my accounts or properties. The confrontation I'd been dreading came when Dad realized his accounts were frozen and his assets were being seized as evidence. He arrived at my office in a rage, demanding explanations and threatening consequences. "You ungrateful little bitch!" he screamed across my conference room, his mask of fatherly concern completely abandoned. "I made you everything you are, and this is how you repay me. I'll destroy you so completely that you'll beg me for mercy." His threats were recorded by the security system I'd installed specifically for this moment. Dad's confession to planning my destruction combined with his admission of feeling entitled to my assets provided additional evidence for the prosecution. "You killed my mother," I said quietly, watching his expression change from rage to calculation. "You murdered her for insurance money and stole her estate. Then you spent 12 years planning to do the same thing to me." For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in Dad's eyes. He'd underestimated my intelligence and determination, assuming I'd remain the grieving teenager he'd manipulated for years. Instead, he faced a woman who'd inherited Mom's business acumen and had access to resources he'd never anticipated. "You can't prove anything," Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew I'd found the journals, seen his confessions, uncovered his entire criminal enterprise. "Actually, I can prove everything," I replied, sliding copies of his journal entries across the table. "Your own words in your own handwriting documenting every crime you've committed since Mom's death. The police are very interested in your detailed confessions." Dad's face went pale as he recognized his own writing. The journals that had fed his narcissistic pride had become instruments of his destruction. His compulsive need to document his cleverness had created an irrefutable record of his crimes. That was the moment I knew justice would finally be served. Dad had spent years believing he was untouchable, protected by my love and trust. Now he faced the consequences of underestimating the daughter whose mother he'd murdered and whose life he'd tried to steal. The arrest happened on a crisp October morning that felt like the first day of the rest of my life. I watched from my office window as Detective Chen and her team surrounded Dad's BMW in the parking garage of his luxury condo building. Even from 12 stories up, I could see his shock and confusion as handcuffs replaced his usual morning coffee routine. The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. local insurance agent arrested in decades-long murder scheme, dominated headlines across every major news outlet. Dad's mugshot looking disheveled and desperate appeared on television screens throughout the city. The man who'd spent years crafting an image of respectability was exposed as a calculating killer. But Dad's arrest was just the beginning. The scope of his criminal network became clear as investigators followed the financial trails documented in his journals. He hadn't operated alone, and his accomplices were scrambling to distance themselves from the mounting evidence. Dr. Morrison, the physician who'd murdered my mother, was arrested at his Costa Rican compound by international authorities. The cowardly doctor had been living under an assumed identity, but Dad's detailed journals provided exact locations and contact information. Interpol coordinated with local police to extradite him back to the United States to face murder charges. The nursing staff who'd participated in Mom's murder were tracked down across the country. Some had continued working in healthcare, carrying their secret guilt for over a decade. Others had left the profession entirely unable to reconcile their actions with their medical oath. All faced serious criminal charges and professional consequences. My alliance network began forming organically as other victims emerged from the shadows. Dad's insurance business had provided him with access to elderly clients who'd trusted him with their financial planning. Many had died under suspicious circumstances after granting him power of attorney over their assets. Margaret Fitzpatrick was the first to contact me directly. Her husband Robert had been Dad's client 5 years earlier, dying suddenly after signing over control of his considerable retirement savings. Margaret had always suspected foul play, but lacked evidence to challenge the official narrative of natural causes. "I knew something was wrong," Margaret told me during our emotional meeting at her home. "Robert was healthy as a horse, then suddenly he's dead 3 days after meeting with your father." The medical examiner claimed heart failure, but Robert's cardiologist had cleared him for another decade of healthy living just weeks before. Margaret's story was heartbreakingly familiar. Dad had befriended Robert through the local Rotary Club, gradually building trust while identifying the scope of his assets. He'd convinced Robert that sophisticated estate planning required comprehensive power of attorney documents, then used those legal instruments to drain accounts before arranging Robert's death. "Your father stole $400,000 from Robert's accounts." Margaret continued producing bank statements that mirrored my own stolen funds. By the time I discovered the theft, the money was gone, and Robert was dead. Everyone told me to move on and grieve properly. Margaret became my strongest ally in building the case against Dad. Her meticulous documentation of Robert's final months provided prosecutors with another clear pattern of Dad's criminal methodology. More importantly, her courage in speaking publicly encouraged other victims to come forward. The Hendersons were next. James and Dorothy Henderson had been married for 57 years when Dad targeted them through his insurance business. James died suddenly after signing over their life savings, leaving Dorothy confused and financially devastated. She'd been living in poverty for 3 years, believing her husband had somehow lost their money through bad investments. "I never understood what happened," Dorothy confessed during our support group meeting. "James was careful with money our entire marriage, then suddenly everything was gone, and he was dead. Your father told me James had made risky investments that failed, leaving nothing but debts." The pattern was becoming unmistakably clear. Dad would identify wealthy elderly clients, gain their trust through professional relationships, manipulate them into granting financial powers, steal their assets, then arrange their deaths to avoid detection. His insurance business provided perfect cover for accessing vulnerable seniors who trusted him with their most important financial decisions. Our alliance grew stronger as more families joined our cause. The Williamson family had lost their patriarch under identical circumstances. The Martinez family discovered their grandmother's estate had been systematically looted before her suspicious death. Each new case strengthened our collective evidence while providing mutual support for grieving families. Detective Chen coordinated our testimonies into a comprehensive case that painted Dad as a serial killer, motivated by greed rather than passion. His victims were chosen strategically based on their wealth and vulnerability, not randomly or emotionally. The calculated nature of his crimes made them even more heinous in the eyes of law enforcement. But our alliance faced challenges as Dad's legal team launched their defense strategy. His expensive attorneys, paid for with stolen money, attempted to discredit our evidence by claiming we were conspiracy theorists, seeking scapegoats for natural deaths and poor financial decisions. David Walsh is a respected businessman being persecuted by ungrateful family members and opportunistic outsiders, his lead attorney argued during preliminary hearings. These accusations are based on speculation and coincidence, not evidence of criminal wrongdoing. Dad's lawyers were skilled at creating reasonable doubt by questioning the timing of suspicious deaths and suggesting alternative explanations for missing money. They portrayed him as a loving father being betrayed by a greedy daughter who wanted to steal his legitimate assets. The most challenging aspect of our alliance was maintaining unity while dealing with intense media scrutiny. Every detail of our family histories became public knowledge, examined and analyzed by strangers who questioned our motives and credibility. Some news outlets suggested we were motivated by inheritance disputes rather than justice for murder victims. My business suffered as clients became uncomfortable with the negative publicity. Employees worried about job security while competitors attempted to poach accounts by suggesting my company was unstable. The professional reputation I'd spent years building was being attacked from multiple directions. But our alliance held strong because we shared a common understanding of Dad's manipulative tactics. Each victim's family recognized the same patterns of charm, trust-building, financial manipulation, and ultimate betrayal. Our shared trauma created bonds that couldn't be broken by legal attacks or media speculation. Margaret Fitzpatrick became our unofficial coordinator, organizing regular meetings where we could share information and provide emotional support. Her strength and determination inspired other families to persevere, despite the intense pressure of public scrutiny and legal challenges. "We're fighting for more than money," Margaret reminded us during particularly difficult moments. "We're fighting to honor our loved ones' memories and prevent your father from claiming more victims. That's worth enduring any amount of temporary discomfort." The alliance also attracted unexpected support from professionals who'd encountered Dad's suspicious behavior over the years. Nurses who'd questioned unusual medical orders, accountants who'd noticed irregular financial patterns, and insurance investigators who'd found inconsistencies in death claims all came forward with additional evidence. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a geriatric specialist, provided crucial testimony about the suspicious pattern of healthy patients dying shortly after becoming Dad's clients. Her medical expertise helped prosecutors explain how Dr. Morrison could have administered fatal drugs while making deaths appear natural. The timing and circumstances of these deaths are medically impossible to explain as coincidence. Dr. Warren testified during preliminary hearings. Healthy elderly patients don't suddenly die from heart failure without underlying conditions, especially not multiple patients who shared the same financial advisor. As our alliance strengthened, Dad's defense team grew more desperate in their attacks. They hired private investigators to dig up personal information about alliance members, hoping to find scandals or inconsistencies that could undermine our credibility. The pressure was intense, but it also revealed the strength of our coalition. Families who'd never met before Dad's crimes became lifelong friends united by shared purpose. We'd transformed from isolated victims into a powerful force for justice that couldn't be intimidated or divided. Standing together in the courthouse during preliminary hearings, watching Dad's confident smirk fade as evidence mounted against him, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Mom's death. Hope that justice would finally prevail. Our alliance had taken Dad's greatest weapon, isolation and confusion, and turned it against him. He'd counted on victims remaining silent and separated, unaware of his larger pattern of crimes. Instead, we'd found each other and built an unshakable foundation for his prosecution. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time since discovering Dad's theft, I felt confident that we would win. The betrayal came from the person I trusted most within our alliance. Margaret Fitzpatrick, who'd become our unofficial leader and my closest confidant, walked into my office on a gray November morning with tears in her eyes and devastating news.
"Savannah, I need to tell you something that will change everything," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper.
"I've been lying to you about Robert's death." My stomach dropped as I watched the woman who'd inspired our entire movement crumble before my eyes. Margaret had been our strongest advocate, the one who'd convinced other families to come forward, the person whose courage had given us all hope for justice. "What do you mean, lying?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. Margaret pulled out a manila envelope, her hands shaking as she extracted documents that would destroy our carefully built case. "Robert didn't die from your father's actions. He died from complications related to medication I gave him. I've been covering up my own crime by blaming your father." The documents revealed that Robert had been suffering from early-stage dementia, a condition Margaret had hidden from everyone, including their own children. She'd been slowly poisoning him with insulin overdoses, making his death appear natural while gaining access to his life insurance and retirement accounts. "I heard about your father's arrest and saw an opportunity," Margaret confessed, unable to meet my eyes. "If I could blame Robert's death on your father's pattern of murders, no one would investigate what really happened. I convinced myself I was helping you while protecting myself." The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Margaret had inserted herself into our alliance, not to seek justice for her husband, but to use our legitimate grief as cover for her own crimes. She'd listened to our pain, offered comfort and support, all while knowing she was as guilty as the man we were trying to convict. "The bank records I showed you were falsified." Margaret continued producing the real financial documents. "Robert never gave your father power of attorney. I created those fake statements to match the pattern you described from your own case." My hands trembled as I reviewed the authentic records. Margaret had systematically drained Robert's accounts herself over several months, timing the thefts to coincide with his deteriorating mental condition. She'd murdered her husband of 57 years for money, then used our alliance to deflect suspicion from her own crimes. "How many others?" I asked, my voice hollow with the realization that our entire foundation might be built on lies. "Just me," Margaret said quickly. "The other families are legitimate victims. Your father really did kill their loved ones. I'm the only imposter in your alliance." But the damage was already catastrophic. Margaret's deception had contaminated our entire case in the eyes of the legal system. Dad's attorneys would use her betrayal to argue that our alliance was built on false accusations and manufactured evidence. They'd claim that if one family could fabricate their story so convincingly, how could any of our testimonies be trusted? The news broke that evening when Margaret's conscience finally overcame her self-preservation instinct. She confessed to Detective Chen, providing detailed documentation of her husband's real cause of death and her systematic theft of his assets. Margaret Fitzpatrick has been arrested for the murder of her husband, Robert. Detective Chen informed me during an emergency meeting. Her confession includes admission that she fabricated evidence to implicate your father in Robert's death. The media frenzy was immediate and devastating. Headlines screamed about the alliance of lies and questioned whether Dad was an innocent man being persecuted by a conspiracy of murderous families. News reports focused on Margaret's deception rather than the legitimate evidence against Dad from other cases. Our alliance members were shell-shocked by the revelation. Families who'd trusted Margaret completely now questioned their own memories and evidence. The woman who'd given them strength to come forward had been manipulating them as cynically as Dad had manipulated his victims. Dorothy Henderson called me in tears. "How do we know any of this is real?" she sobbed. "If Margaret could lie so convincingly about Robert, maybe I'm wrong about what happened to James. Maybe your father is innocent." The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective. Margaret's betrayal didn't just damage our legal case, it destroyed our emotional foundation. Alliance members began doubting their own experiences, wondering if their grief had made them susceptible to suggestion and false memories. Dad's legal team immediately filed motions to dismiss all charges, arguing that the prosecution's case was built on perjured testimony and fabricated evidence. They painted our alliance as a group of delusional conspirators led by a manipulative murderer who'd fooled everyone, including the police. The entire foundation of this prosecution has been revealed as fraudulent. Dad's lead attorney argued in court. Margaret Fitzpatrick confessed to murdering her own husband while falsely accusing our client of the same crime. This raises serious questions about the reliability of all testimony from this so-called alliance. The judge ordered a comprehensive review of all evidence, effectively halting Dad's prosecution, while investigators verified the legitimacy of each family's claims. What should have been Dad's conviction became an opportunity for him to potentially escape justice entirely. I watched Dad's confidence return as news reports focused on Margaret's deception rather than his documented crimes. He began giving interviews from jail, portraying himself as the victim of a malicious conspiracy orchestrated by his ungrateful daughter and her delusional allies. "I'm a loving father who's being destroyed by lies and manipulation," Dad told reporters through his attorney. "My daughter has convinced innocent grieving families that I'm responsible for deaths that were either natural or, as we now know, committed by the accusers themselves." The worst part was watching our alliance crumble under the pressure of doubt and media scrutiny. Families who'd found strength in our shared purpose began withdrawing from the case, afraid that their association with Margaret's deception would invalidate their own legitimate claims for justice. The Hendersons were the first to abandon our alliance. "We can't risk being associated with this scandal," James's son told me during a painful phone call. "Dad's dead either way, and we can't afford to have our family's reputation destroyed by false accusations." One by one, other families followed the same pattern. They'd been traumatized by their loved ones' deaths, then traumatized again by Margaret's betrayal. The legal system's failure to distinguish between legitimate victims and manipulative criminals left them feeling hopeless and abandoned. Within 2 weeks, our alliance had shrunk from 12 families to just 3. The solidarity that had given us strength became a liability as Margaret's actions contaminated everything we'd built together. Dad's legal team used our dwindling numbers as evidence that even the victims didn't believe their own accusations. Sitting alone in my office, surrounded by boxes of evidence that suddenly seemed meaningless, I felt the same despair I'd experienced when Mom died. The system was failing again, allowing a guilty man to escape justice because one manipulative person had exploited our genuine pain for her own criminal purposes. But as I reviewed Dad's own journals and the irrefutable evidence of his crimes, I realized that Margaret's betrayal, devastating as it was, couldn't erase the truth. Dad was still guilty of murdering my mother and stealing from multiple victims. Her deception might complicate our case, but it couldn't change the facts we'd uncovered. The question was whether I had the strength to continue fighting alone, knowing that Dad's attorneys would use every advantage to destroy my credibility and reputation. Margaret had given them the perfect weapon, but I still had the truth. Just when everything seemed hopeless, salvation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a forensic accountant who'd been following our case through media coverage, contacted me with information that would change everything. I've been investigating similar cases across 3 states, Dr. Rodriguez explained during our first meeting at her downtown office. Your father's pattern matches a series of suspicious deaths I've been tracking for the past 5 years. I believe Margaret Fitzpatrick's deception was actually planned to sabotage your case. The revelation hit me like lightning. Dr. Rodriguez had been conducting an independent investigation into elderly financial abuse when she noticed the pattern of deaths connected to Dad's insurance business. Her research had been ongoing for years, completely separate from our alliance's efforts. Margaret Fitzpatrick contacted my office 6 months ago. Dr. Rodriguez continued showing me email records that made my blood run cold. She claimed to be researching her husband's death and asked detailed questions about how families might fabricate evidence against financial advisors. I thought she was seeking advice on building a legitimate case. The emails revealed that Margaret had been planning her deception long before she ever contacted me. She'd researched exactly how to create false documentation that would match Dad's real pattern of crimes. Her goal wasn't just to cover up her own murder of Robert, but to deliberately destroy any legitimate case against Dad. I believe your father and Margaret were working together, Dr. Rodriguez explained, presenting a financial analysis that connected Margaret's bank accounts to Dad's criminal network. She received payments from an offshore account linked to your father's stolen funds. This was a coordinated effort to discredit your alliance. The conspiracy was more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Dad hadn't just been stealing from individual victims. He'd been building a network of accomplices who could help him escape justice if his crimes were ever discovered. Margaret's role was to infiltrate any opposition and destroy it from within. Dr. Rodriguez's investigation had uncovered the digital paper trail that proved this coordination. Margaret had received over $200,000 from Dad's network in exchange for sabotaging our alliance. Her emotional breakdowns and confessions had been carefully calculated performances designed to create maximum damage to our credibility. The timing of her confession was strategic, Dr. Rodriguez pointed out. She waited until your alliance had gathered maximum evidence and media attention, then destroyed everything at the moment when it would cause the most harm to your case and the most benefit to your father's defense. Armed with this new evidence, I immediately contacted Detective Chen and the prosecutorial team. The revelation that Margaret's betrayal was actually part of Dad's criminal conspiracy transformed her actions from an unfortunate coincidence into additional evidence of his guilt. This changes everything, Detective Chen admitted after reviewing Dr. Rodriguez's findings. Margaret Fitzpatrick wasn't just covering up her own crime. She was actively participating in your father's ongoing criminal enterprise. Her deception becomes evidence of conspiracy rather than reasonable doubt. Dr. Rodriguez agreed to serve as an expert witness, bringing her 5 years of independent research to support our case. Her credibility was unassailable. She had no personal connection to any victims and had been investigating Dad's crimes through purely professional channels. I can demonstrate that David Walsh has been operating a sophisticated criminal network for over 15 years. Dr. Rodriguez testified during emergency hearings to reinstate Dad's prosecution. Margaret Fitzpatrick was recruited specifically to infiltrate and destroy any organized opposition to his activities. Her testimony included financial forensics that traced money flows between Dad's various criminal enterprises and his accomplice network. Margaret was just one of several people Dad had recruited to help him escape justice by creating false narratives and destroying evidence. The court was stunned by the scope of Dad's criminal organization. What had appeared to be individual acts of theft and murder were revealed as part of a coordinated enterprise that included money laundering, witness intimidation, and systematic evidence destruction. Dr. Rodriguez's evidence also rehabilitated our original alliance members. The legitimate families who'd abandoned our cause in fear could now return knowing that Margaret's deception was part of the conspiracy they were fighting against, not evidence that their own experiences were false. Your father recruited Margaret specifically because her husband really was dead, and she really had stolen his money. Dr. Rodriguez explained to me privately. He needed someone who could convincingly play the role of a grieving victim while actually being guilty of similar crimes. She was the perfect double agent. The Henderson family was the first to rejoin our alliance after learning about the conspiracy. "We feel so foolish for abandoning you," Dorothy Henderson told me through tears. "Margaret's lies almost let your father escape justice for killing our James." One by one, the other families returned as Dr. Rodriguez's evidence proved that their original testimonies had been accurate, and their trust in Margaret had been exploited by Dad's criminal network. The alliance that had seemed destroyed was stronger than ever, united by anger at the sophisticated manipulation they'd endured. Dr. Rodriguez's investigation also uncovered additional victims we'd never identified. Her forensic analysis revealed suspicious deaths and financial thefts across multiple states, all connected to Dad's insurance business and accomplice network. The scope of his crimes was far larger than even our expanded alliance had realized. "I estimate your father's criminal enterprise has generated over $5 million in stolen assets over 15 years," Dr. Rodriguez reported to prosecutors. "He's responsible for at least 20 suspicious deaths and has accomplices in medical, legal, and financial professions across multiple jurisdictions." The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Dad's own journals had documented his central role in coordinating these crimes while Dr. Sol. Rodriguez's financial forensics proved the money trails connecting all participants. Margaret's betrayal had backfired spectacularly, providing additional evidence of the conspiracy rather than creating reasonable doubt. Dad's legal team attempted to dismiss Dr. Rodriguez's evidence as speculation and conspiracy theories, but her professional credentials and methodical documentation were impossible to attack. She'd spent years building an airtight case using established forensic accounting principles and independent verification. Dr. Rodriguez represents everything our original investigation should have been, the lead prosecutor told me during case preparation. Her evidence transforms this from a family dispute into a federal racketeering case. Your father won't just face state charges for individual crimes. He'll face federal conspiracy charges that carry life sentences. The psychological impact on Dad was visible during court proceedings. His confident smirk disappeared as Dr. Rodriguez methodically presented evidence of his criminal network. He'd believed Margaret's sabotage had destroyed any chance of conviction, only to discover that her betrayal had actually strengthened the case against him. Your father built his entire defense strategy around Margaret's deception, Dr. Rodriguez observed. When that deception was revealed as part of his own conspiracy, his entire legal position collapsed. He has no remaining options for avoiding conviction. Standing beside Dr. Rodriguez as she presented her findings to the court, I felt the tide turning definitively in favor of justice. Dad had underestimated the power of truth and professional investigation. His sophisticated criminal network was about to become the instrument of his own destruction. Margaret's betrayal, which had seemed like the death blow to our case, had actually led us to the evidence that would ensure Dad's conviction and expose the full scope of his criminal enterprise. The final day in court felt like vindication for every victim Dad had ever harmed. Judge Harrison's chambers were packed with family members, investigators, and media representatives, all waiting to witness justice finally being served. Dad sat at the defendant's table looking smaller and more desperate than I'd ever seen him. His expensive suit unable to disguise the weight of overwhelming evidence. Dr. Rodriguez had spent 3 days methodically presenting her forensic analysis, connecting 15 years of crimes through an unbreakable chain of financial evidence. Dad's own journals provided the narrative, while her professional investigations supplied the irrefutable proof. Even his expensive legal team had stopped objecting, recognizing that their client's conviction was inevitable. When Judge Harrison began reading the verdicts, Dad's face went ashen as each charge was confirmed: guilty of first-degree murder in my mother's death, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder in 12 additional cases, guilty of elder abuse, fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The man who'd spent years believing he was untouchable faced multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. David Walsh, you have operated a criminal enterprise that has caused immeasurable pain to countless families. Judge Harrison stated, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. Your crimes represent a betrayal of trust so profound that it shakes the foundation of human decency. You preyed upon the elderly, murdered your own wife, and attempted to destroy your daughter's life for financial gain. Dad's sentencing included full restitution to all victims, forfeiture of all assets purchased with stolen funds, and cooperation with federal authorities investigating his accomplice network. The Miami condo, the BMW, and every luxury item he'd bought with blood money would be sold to compensate the families he'd devastated. Margaret Fitzpatrick received 25 years for her role in the conspiracy. Her cooperation with Dad's criminal enterprise, adding federal charges to her murder conviction. Dr. Morrison was extradited and sentenced to life without parole for multiple counts of murder for hire. The nursing staff who'd participated in my mother's death received sentences ranging from 10 to 15 years. But the most satisfying moment came when Dad was forced to publicly acknowledge his crimes during victim impact statements. Each family member stood before him and described how his actions had destroyed their lives, stolen their loved ones, and shattered their faith in human decency. You murdered my husband after 40 years of marriage. Dorothy Henderson told Dad, her voice strong with righteous anger. You stole our retirement savings and left me wondering what I'd done wrong. Now I know the only thing I did wrong was trust you. When my turn came, I looked directly into Dad's eyes and spoke the words I'd been preparing since discovering his theft. You killed my mother when I was 16. then spent 12 years manipulating me while planning to kill me too. You taught me that blood doesn't make family, but you also taught me that justice is worth fighting for no matter how long it takes. Dad's response was pathetic and self-serving. He attempted to claim his actions were motivated by love and financial pressure, refusing to accept responsibility for the calculated nature of his crimes. Even facing life in prison, he couldn't abandon the narcissistic delusion that he was the victim of ungrateful people who didn't appreciate his sacrifices. The criminal trials concluded, but our alliance had evolved into something more meaningful than a prosecution support group. The families who'd survived Dad's crimes had become a chosen family, bound by shared trauma and collective healing. We established a foundation to help other elder abuse victims and support families navigating suspicious deaths. Dr. Rodriguez became our technical advisor, using her forensic expertise to identify other criminal networks operating similar schemes. Her investigation had revealed that Dad's enterprise was just one of dozens targeting vulnerable elderly populations across the country. Our foundation's work expanded to support federal efforts to combat organized elder abuse. My business not only survived the negative publicity, but thrived as clients appreciated my commitment to justice and family values. The skills I'd developed fighting Dad's criminal network translated perfectly to helping other businesses navigate complex challenges and protect themselves from internal threats. 6 months after Dad's conviction, I received a letter from Mom's best friend Helen, who'd moved to Oregon shortly after Mom's death. Helen had always suspected Dad's involvement in Mom's suspicious passing, but lacked evidence to challenge his narrative of medical complications. "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become," Helen wrote. "Patricia always worried about leaving you alone with David, but she never imagined he'd actually hurt her to get control of her assets. She'd be amazed to see how you turned his own weapons against him and found justice for all his victims." Helen's letter included photos of Mom that Dad had hidden from me, showing a vibrant woman planning for a future she'd never see. Mom had been researching divorce attorneys before her death, having discovered Dad's gambling addiction and suspicious financial activities. She'd been planning to leave him when he decided murder was more profitable than alimony. The photos reminded me that my victory wasn't just personal justice, but vindication for Mom's memory. She'd raised me to be strong, independent, and morally courageous. Dad had tried to destroy those qualities through manipulation and abuse, but ultimately, they'd been the tools that brought him down. Our foundation's first major success came when we helped identify a similar criminal network in Phoenix, leading to the arrest of 3 people operating Dad's exact scheme in retirement communities. Dr. Rodriguez's forensic methods had become a model for investigating organized elder abuse, preventing countless future victims from experiencing our family's trauma. Standing in my office today, looking at the wall where I'd hung photos of all Dad's victims, alongside pictures of their families healing and moving forward, I understand that some battles are worth fighting regardless of personal cost. Dad stole years of my life through manipulation and betrayal, but ultimately his crimes led me to discover strength I never knew I possessed. The money he stole has been recovered and redistributed to victim families. His criminal network has been dismantled and prosecuted. Most importantly, the truth about his crimes has been permanently documented, ensuring that his victims' memories are honored and protected. My chosen family now includes Dorothy Henderson, who's become like a grandmother to me, the Martinez siblings who share holiday dinners at my house, and Dr. Rodriguez, whose friendship has been built on our shared commitment to justice for vulnerable populations. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely had been betraying you for years? How did you find the strength to seek justice instead of just walking away? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, because sometimes sharing our experiences helps others find courage to fight their own battles. If this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming manipulation and finding healing. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that justice is possible, even when the system seems stacked against survivors. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and for believing that truth and persistence can overcome even the most sophisticated deception. Remember that chosen family built on respect and shared values is always stronger than blood relationships built on manipulation and abuse. Stay strong, seek truth, and never stop fighting for justice.